What if I told you that in the heart of Mexico there once existed a city larger than Paris, that a people there cultivated floating gardens, drank sacred chocolate, and read the future in the stars? The Aztecs, often reduced to bloody cliches, were far more than warriors. They were a brilliant, poetic, organized civilization, deeply connected to nature and the gods. Today we're diving into some fascinating facts that reveal the full richness of this little-known and truly spectacular culture. Ready for the journey? Let's go. The floating city of Tenochtitlan. Imagine a vast mirror of water stretching to the horizon, and at its center, a dazzling, vibrant city, literally resting on the lake. This was Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire. Built on a series of artificial islands in the heart of Lake Texcoco, the city appeared to float between sky and water. A masterpiece of pre-Columbian engineering. People got around on foot, of course, but more commonly by canoe, navigating a complex network of canals. Wooden bridges connected the districts and could be lifted in the event of an attack, both a natural defense system and a unique way of life. The streets were wide and paved, lined with white stone buildings and bustling markets. It's said that the great market of Tlatelolco alone welcomed more than 60,000 people each day, one of the largest commercial hubs on the continent. At the heart of the city stood the Templo Mayor, the Great Temple, dedicated to the gods Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc. A massive staircase led to the top, where priests performed sacred rituals. But Tenochtitlan wasn't just a sacred city. It was a modern metropolis for its time. It had schools, aqueducts bringing fresh water from the mountains, and even a rudimentary urban waste system. With over 200,000 inhabitants at its peak, Tenochtitlan rivaled London, Constantinople, or Paris. When the Spanish conquistadors discovered it in 1519, they were utterly stunned by its beauty, organization, and grandeur. Sadly, the city was almost completely destroyed after the conquest. Today, its foundations lie beneath modern-day Mexico City, but its memory still floats in the collective imagination, like the Venice of the New World. The floating gardens, or chinampas. But how could a city of over 200,000 people, built on a lake, manage to feed itself? The answer lies in one of the greatest agricultural innovations of the Aztecs, the chinampas. These floating gardens weren't rafts, but true man-made islands carefully constructed by layering mud, reeds, soil, and aquatic vegetation, all anchored securely to the lakebed with wooden stakes, often willow trees. On their surface, they grew everything: corn, tomatoes, beans, chili peppers, flowers, and even medicinal plants. The soil was so fertile that it allowed for multiple harvests each year. The lake water provided natural irrigation, and the canals surrounding each plot made transportation and daily work far easier. It was an intensive, local, and sustainable form of agriculture long before those terms became trendy. The chinampas formed a checkerboard landscape, alternating water and greenery like a living botanical puzzle. Thanks to this system, Tenochtitlan was nearly self-sufficient in food. Even today, some chinampas are still in use, particularly in Xochimilco, near Mexico City. A millennia-old legacy that proves ecological innovation isn't a modern invention, but sometimes an ancient wisdom rediscovered. A society structured in strata. Aztec society didn't function randomly. It was finely organized, almost like a pyramid, mirroring the shape of their temples. At the very top stood the Huitzilopochtli, the emperor, literally the one who speaks. He wasn't just a king, he was the link between humans and the gods, the commander-in-chief, the supreme judge, and a near-divine figure. Just below him were the nobles, known as Pipiltin. They formed a hereditary elite made up of high-ranking officials, generals, and governors. They managed the territories, collected taxes, and enforced the laws. Next came the priests, the guardians of knowledge, rituals, and calendars. Their role was central. They interpreted the signs of the cosmos, led sacred ceremonies, and educated young nobles. Then there were the merchants, or pochtecas. Far more than simple traders, they maintained commercial ties between cities, and at times acted as spies on behalf of the empire. Artisans and artists also held a unique place. Feather workers, sculptors, goldsmiths. Their skill could earn them considerable respect, even without noble status. At the base were the farmers and laborers who worked the land, built the temples, and ensured the survival of the entire society. And finally, the slaves, often war captives or people in debt. But unlike in many other civilizations, Aztec slaves could sometimes buy back their freedom. Each social class had its own duties, its privileges, and even its specific attire. In Tenochtitlan, a single glance was enough to tell who someone was. Clothes, jewelry, hairstyles, everything was codified. It was a society that seemed rigid, yet allowed for social mobility. A brave warrior, for instance, could rise through the ranks and even become a noble. The slave, free to leave? When we hear the word slavery, we often think of total deprivation of freedom, a fate with no escape. But in Aztec society, slavery operated under very different rules. First of all, a slave was not permanent property. They had rights. They could own possessions, get married, and most importantly, buy back their own freedom. Even more surprising, some people sold themselves into temporary slavery. It was a way to pay off a debt, escape extreme poverty, or provide for their family. Often a pragmatic decision made in the hope of a better future. Aztec slavery was not hereditary. The child of a slave was born free, and if a master mistreated their slave, the latter could escape to a temple or a market. If they reached a public place without being caught, they were declared free. Of course, it wasn't all ideal. War captives, for instance, became slaves with no hope of freedom, often used for hard labor or religious rituals. But in Aztec society, slavery wasn't necessarily a life sentence. It was part of a complex, regulated system that was, in some ways, surprisingly flexible. Learning the art of war from childhood among the Aztecs, becoming a warrior wasn't optional. It was a sacred duty, a destiny shaped from early childhood. By the age of 6 or 7, boys were sent to school, not to learn reading or writing as we know it today, but to be trained for combat. Education was free, but harsh. There were 2 types of schools, the Telpochcali, for the sons of commoners, and the Calmecac, reserved for children of the nobility. In both cases, training was physical, moral, and spiritual. They were taught to wield traditional weapons, the spear, the atlatl, a spear thrower, and most importantly, the macuahuitl, a type of wooden sword embedded with obsidian blades. But beyond weapons, they were instilled with discipline, endurance, courage, and loyalty. Young students had to carry heavy loads, endure the cold, rise before dawn, and learn to live with little. Suffering wasn't seen as punishment, but as training for both body and soul. Becoming a good warrior wasn't just about fighting skills, it meant serving the gods, protecting the people, and bringing honor to one's lineage. Valor in battle was one of the few ways to rise in the social hierarchy, even for a peasant. In this civilization, war wasn't merely about territory. It was a way of life, a form of education, deeply embedded in collective values. The macuahuitl. Let's now talk about one of the most distinctive and fearsome weapons of the Aztecs, the macuahuitl. At first glance, it might seem like a simple object, a broad rectangular wooden sword with obsidian blades set along its edges. And yet, this weapon was anything but ordinary. The obsidian blades, volcanic glass, were incredibly sharp, crafted with astonishing precision. Though not made of metal, obsidian could cut like a razor. A single strike from a macuahuitl could cleanly sever an arm, or even a head. The macuahuitl was primarily used by Aztec warriors in close combat, but contrary to what one might think, it wasn't just designed to kill. It was also a symbolic weapon, representing power and the Aztecs' connection to nature. Obsidian, a volcanic stone associated with fire, the gods, and creation, gave each strike a sacred dimension. Warriors fought not only to win, but to honor the gods with every movement. Though simple in appearance, the weapon was devastatingly effective. More importantly, it carried profound cultural significance. The macuahuitl was not just a tool of war, it was part of Aztec identity, a fusion of nature, ritual, and controlled violence. A polytheistic and cosmic religion. The Aztecs, far more than mere warriors, were first and foremost deeply spiritual beings in harmony with the universe. Their religion was a complex tapestry woven from myths, rituals, and deities. At the top of their pantheon was Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war. His role was crucial. He was the protector of the empire, the one who led the warriors into battle. Each night he fought against the darkness, and each day his triumph symbolized the victory of light over darkness. For the Aztecs, this meant that they had to constantly honor Huitzilopochtli, for without him, civilization would be plunged into darkness. Then there was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, god of wisdom, creation, and wind. Unlike Huitzilopochtli, Quetzalcoatl was associated with lightness and knowledge, and his influence extended beyond mere war rituals. He embodied the balance between nature and human intellect, and the Aztecs credited him with creating humanity from corn. But this was just a tiny part of the Aztec pantheon. Each god ruled over a specific aspect of the universe: rain, crops, winds, earth, war, fertility. Natural cycles were seen as reflections of divine cycles, and every change of season, every weather phenomenon, was a manifestation of the god's will. The Aztecs did not simply pray to these gods. They offered sacrifices, sometimes even blood, or prisoners of war, because they believed that blood nourished the gods and ensured the continuity of the universe. Thus, Aztec religion was not just a spiritual belief, it was a cosmic worldview where everything was connected, where the human and the divine coexisted in a constant dance between order and chaos. Highly codified rituals. The Aztecs practiced a rigorous and codified religion where every gesture, every ceremony had a profound meaning. Among these rituals, human sacrifices held a central place. But beware, far from the cliches of blind barbarism, their purpose was primarily symbolic. It was about feeding the gods and maintaining the balance of the world. Blood was seen as the vital essence of the universe, the sacred fluid that maintained cosmic harmony. According to their belief, the gods had sacrificed themselves to create life and preserve the order of things. Thus, humans, through their sacrifices, had to honor this divine gift by offering their own blood in turn to renew the divine energy and ensure that the sun would rise each day. Sacrifices were therefore far from being gratuitous acts of violence. Each ceremony took place within a precise framework, with prayers, songs, and dances. The most emblematic site was the Templo Mayor, where priests in ritual attire performed these acts in front of crowds of believers. The victims of these sacrifices were primarily prisoners of war, sometimes slaves. But it wasn't just about taking lives. The offering of blood allowed the Aztecs to maintain the cosmic balance, nourish the gods, and ensure that the world would continue to turn. It was not simple barbarism. It was a codified ritual act, deeply rooted in a cosmic worldview where the balance of natural forces depended on the maintenance of divine order through sacrifice. The heart, the center of life. For the Aztecs, the heart was not merely a physical organ. It was the soul, the very essence of life. It was the center of the being, the point of interconnection between the body, the spirit, and the divine. In their worldview, offering one's heart was the supreme act of devotion. During sacrifices, once the victim was immobile on the temple, a priest would seize the heart with an obsidian blade, remove it, and raise it towards the heavens to nourish the gods. This gesture, shocking to us today, was not perceived as mere violence. Giving one's heart to a god was to offer life itself. It was a sacred, profound, noble act, a way to maintain the balance of the world. Without this act of sacrifice, the gods, according to Aztec belief, could not feed, and eventually the universe would plunge into chaos. It may seem incomprehensible in today's context, but for the Aztecs, this ritual held a deep cosmic and spiritual meaning. Their religion was based on the idea that blood, and more specifically the heart, was a means of sustaining the balance of the world. Beyond the apparent violence, it was an act of honor, a demonstration of loyalty to the gods, and a form of connection between the human and the divine. Thus, the offering of the heart was seen as a sacred responsibility rather than as barbarism. A double calendar. The Aztecs had a fascinating way of perceiving time. They used not one, but two different calendars. This complex organization governed every aspect of their life, whether religious, agricultural, or political. The first calendar, the Tonalpohualli, was a ritual calendar of 260 days. It was based on sacred cycles, with each day associated with a specific sign and number. This calendar was used to determine the auspicious times for religious rituals, sacrifices, and other spiritual events. It was a tool for harmonizing daily life with the will of the gods by aligning with their cycles and signs. The second calendar, the Xiuhpohualli, was a solar calendar of 365 days. This calendar, closer to our own system, governed agricultural and political life. It was divided into 18 months of 20 days each, plus an additional month of 5 days. It determined the seasons, the times for planting and harvesting crops, as well as civil festivals. But here's what is even more incredible. These two calendars overlapped, forming a matrix of 52 years. This period was known as the Aztec century, and each unique combination of days in the two calendars only repeated once every 52 years. When this period came to an end, it was a time of great concern for the Aztecs. They believed the world might collapse, and it was a moment for very important rituals to prevent the end of the universe. Thus, their perception of time was not linear, but cyclical, where each day, each year, each century had a sacred role to play in the cosmic order. The art of featherwork. Aztec art was not limited to sculpture or painting. One of their most breathtaking specialties was featherwork, a complex art form that transformed feathers into objects of incredible beauty. Feathers were regarded as sacred, and their collection was a ritual act. Some feathers came from rare birds, like the quetzal, whose iridescent green feathers were particularly prized. These feathers, meticulously cut and assembled, were used to create headdresses, cloaks, shields, and other decorative objects with astonishing delicacy and precision. The artisans, known as tlamakasqui, would spend hours weaving these feathers, creating geometric patterns, divine figures, and sacred scenes. Each work was a symbol of the cultural and religious wealth of the Aztec Empire. This craftsmanship was reserved for elite artisans, often serving the emperor, priests, or nobles. Feathers were more than just a decorative material, they were a symbol of power. Headdresses worn during ceremonies were signs of prestige and social status. For example, a warrior who captured a certain number of prisoners of war might be awarded a feathered cloak in recognition of his bravery. This fascinating art was not just an aesthetic expression, but also a gateway to the invisible, connecting the Aztecs to their gods, the sky, and nature. A living language, Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, is much more than a mere relic of the past. Contrary to what one might think, it is still spoken today, alive and used by around 2 million people in Mexico. It is a rich, vibrant, and poetic language that continues to play an essential role in the culture and identity of Mexico's indigenous communities. Nahuatl is an agglutinative language, meaning it forms complex words by combining several elements of meaning. For example, the word Cuauhtémoc, the name of the last Aztec emperor, literally means descend of the sun or the fall of the sun, a poetic image perfectly in harmony with Aztec beliefs. Beyond its linguistic structure, Nahuatl is also a deeply symbolic language. Every word is imbued with spiritual beliefs, references to nature, and connections to the cosmos. It was a language not only used for communication, but also for transmitting sacred knowledge and worldviews. Despite the impact of colonization and centuries of Spanish domination, Nahuatl has survived, adapting and transforming over the ages. Today, many Mexicans continue to use it in their daily lives, especially in rural and indigenous areas, where it remains a symbol of cultural resilience. The fact that Nahuatl is still spoken today is a living testament to the endurance of this civilization and the strength of its traditions. A language that has crossed centuries to survive and thrive in the modern world. Nezahualcoyotl, the Poet King. Nezahualcoyotl was not just a king, he was a thinker, a philosopher, and a genius poet. Sovereign of Texcoco, one of the most important cities in the Aztec Empire, he ruled a prosperous kingdom, but his legacy goes far beyond his ability to govern. Nezahualcoyotl is best known for his poignant verses on life, death, time, and human existence. In his poems, he questioned the meaning of life, the fleeting nature of the world, and the pursuit of happiness. He left a collection of texts that have survived through the centuries, reflections of a deep sensitivity. For example, in one of his poems he wrote, "We live on this earth, but we do not know what comes after death." These lines reveal a profound reflection on the human condition, where he speaks of both the uncertainty and beauty of the world. Nezahualcoyotl pondered the nature of the soul and how humans should prepare for death while living in the present moment. His poems were ready for action. They were not just meditations, but invitations to a richer, more conscious life. He expressed doubt, but also the search for wisdom, the quest for the sacred and the sublime. In addition to his literary talents, he also had a significant impact as a political and social reformer. However, it is mainly through his poetry that his name remains etched in history. This poet king embodies a vision of the world where spiritual and philosophical reflection intertwines with the beauty of art and popular wisdom. The ritual ball game, the tlachtli, the ball game played by the Aztecs, was much more than just a sport. It was a sacred ritual, a spectacle of strength and strategy that carried a cosmic dimension. The game was played on eye-shaped courts, and the players faced off, trying to pass a rubber ball through stone rings, often without using their hands, but instead their hips, elbows, or knees. But what made this game truly unique was its connection to cosmic myths. The ball, for example, was not just a physical object. It represented the sun, and the playing field symbolized the world. Victories and defeats thus had profound spiritual implications, representing cycles of life, struggles between light and darkness, and cosmic forces moving over time. For the Aztecs, the ball game was not merely a competition between individuals. Sometimes it was linked to human sacrifices, where the losing team could be required to offer one of their own members as a sacrifice, a symbolic gesture of devotion to the gods. Thus, this game was not just entertainment. It was part of a divine ritual meant to maintain the balance between cosmic forces, honor the gods, and celebrate the harmony between man and the universe. Victory in this game could be both spiritual and physical, with stakes far greater than those of a simple competition. Sacred chocolate. Cacao held a unique place in Aztec culture. It was not merely a beverage. It was a sacred elixir reserved for the nobles, warriors, and sometimes even the priests. The Aztecs did not drink cacao as we know it today, sweet and creamy. No, their beverage was much more bitter, prepared with ground cacao beans, often mixed with spices like chili, creating a spicy and intense flavor. Cacao was seen as a gift from the gods, and its consumption was ritualistic. It was used during religious ceremonies, and the drink had profound spiritual connotations. Cacao symbolized fertility, life, and prosperity, and warriors in particular consumed it before going to war, believing it granted them strength and courage. Chocolate was also a way to reaffirm social status. It was not accessible to everyone. It was a drink that only the elites could indulge in, marking the distinction between the nobles and other social classes, while also emphasizing the sacredness of the act of drinking this divine brew. The Aztecs also used cacao beans as currency. A package of cacao could be exchanged for goods or services, and its price varied according to supply and demand. Therefore, cacao had both a sacred and economic value that went far beyond its mere taste. Cacao as currency. Cacao beans were not only used to prepare a sacred beverage, they also played a crucial role in the Aztec economy. Indeed, the Aztecs literally used cacao beans as currency. They held significant value and were used to purchase a variety of goods. Imagine for a moment, with just a few well-preserved cacao beans, one could buy a hot meal or even a cloth cape. Their value depended on the quality of the beans and how well they were stored. Thus, cacao was not just a source of nourishment or a ritual beverage, it was also a central element in everyday commerce. As currency, cacao offered economic flexibility that other goods could not provide. It was portable, easy to trade, and measurable. Merchants and artisans used it to settle transactions, just as we use coins or bills today. Moreover, this form of currency reflected the sacred and divine importance of cacao in Aztec society. It was seen as a gift from the gods, so using cacao beans to exchange goods was not merely an economic matter, it was a way to connect the material world to the spiritual and cosmic order. A troubling prophecy. The Aztecs deeply believed in a prophecy that foretold the return of a powerful god, a god with light skin who would come from the sea. This god, often identified as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, had promised to return one day to restore balance to the world. This belief was deeply embedded in Aztec culture, shaping their views on destiny and the future. When the Spaniards, led by Hernán Cortés, arrived in 1519, landing on the Mexican coasts with their horses, shining armor, and white sails floating on their ships, some Aztecs saw this arrival as a sign of the prophecy being fulfilled. Their first impressions, struck by this unusual sight, created doubt and sometimes even panic within Aztec society. Some believed that Cortés was the incarnation of Quetzalcoatl, returning to fulfill the destiny foretold by the ancient myths. While this prophecy was not universally shared among all Aztecs, it had a significant impact on how the events were perceived. It is possible that this belief played a role in the initial reception of the Spaniards and the quick submission of some local populations, thinking they were dealing with divine beings. However, this interpretation quickly faded, especially after the Spaniards began imposing their domination and destroying Aztec religious and cultural structures. This clash of civilizations had tragic consequences, but the prophecy itself remains a fascinating part of Aztec history, marked by the encounter between the real and the supernatural. The myth of the suns. The Aztecs had a worldview profoundly shaped by cosmic cycles, past epochs, and cataclysmic destinies. According to their belief, the world they lived in was not the first, but rather the fifth sun in a series of successive worlds. Their mythology held that 4 previous eras had already been destroyed, each by a different catastrophe: floods, famine, fire, and darkness. This 5th sun, under which the Aztecs lived, was destined for a tragic end. They believed that this age would eventually be swallowed by another great cataclysm, but it was not a fate sealed in stone. Every day the Aztecs worked with a deep determination to delay this end. Their daily rituals, sacrifices, and acts of devotion to the gods were all part of this eternal cycle of maintaining cosmic balance. Human sacrifices were an essential part of this system. They believed that the blood spilled nourished the gods, who in turn allowed the sun to rise each day and the world to continue to exist. Their actions were motivated by a fundamental belief that their survival and the order of the world depended on their ability to keep these cycles in motion. For the Aztecs, the end of the 5th sun would not be merely a natural event, it was destiny. Every moment spent on Earth was a sacred effort to delay this inevitable cataclysm. And in this constant waiting for the end, the Aztecs lived fully, believing that each action could help prolong the light, protect the Earth, and push back the shadow. So here we are, some windows into a world both majestic, mysterious, and often misunderstood. The Aztecs may have disappeared as an empire, but their cultural, linguistic, and spiritual legacy continues to live on in Mexico, in traditions, words, and symbols. Thank you for traveling with us. If you enjoy this kind of storytelling, consider subscribing, liking, or simply sharing this little journey with others.